Hey guys, what's going on? This is Wes. Welcome to the Independent Creatives Podcast. I am a comic book illustrator and a writer, and today I have my friend Zach Chapman with me. Zach, do you want to give us a brief introduction?
Hey, yeah. I'm a comics creator. I'm a writer primarily, but I also edit and I also letter, and I also do a lot of design work myself. Yeah, I've written. My current work right now is A Haunting on Mars. Um, I also have House of Blood, Kaiju Blues, um, The Spellslinger. Um, I think that's about it.
Yeah, you just closed out your Kickstarter and you hit $5,502. Congrats on that, because your
Thanks.
pledge goal was 2,900. You got a trailer here. You want to let me go ahead and play this real quick, and then we'll
Sure.
talk about
I
your.
have a newer one that
Okay.
that's actually it's kind of live right now. If you scroll up, just go up and then if you it's the same URL, but instead of 1 through 3, it's 1 through 4. So
This one?
this you can actually people can still back this even though it just
Okay.
ended this week. This is the
Okay.
latest and you can get all of the issues, and I will have another Kickstarter, I think, in probably 2 months with the 5th and final issue.
Okay. Cool. So this is basically like a mini series, is what this one is.
It's a 5-issue mini series, and it tells one story of this corporate team with a terrorist hacker that was part of the team that is like kind of a prisoner on the team. They're sent to Mars to retrieve uh, kind of a MacGuffin, and on Mars is basically a haunted house, or what
Hmm.
seems to be a haunted house at first, and that's part of like the mystery and the corporate suspense of what the heck they're actually looking for.
That sounds awesome. I'm gonna go ahead and play this trailer. Let's check this out.
Hey, I'm Zach Chapman, the writer and co-creator of A Haunting on Mars. Thank you for checking out our project. A Haunting on Mars is a cyberpunk ghost story set on a derelict Mars. It's about a team of corporate mercenaries sent to retrieve a piece of revolutionary technology from a dead colony on Mars, and the team runs into unexpected and possibly supernatural threats. There's also a healthy dose of betrayal and corporate espionage. Earlier this year, we had a successful Kickstarter for issues 1 through 3. Right now, we're looking for funding on issue 4. Uh, for those of you who are returning to the series, we have a standard cover by the co-creator Rory Coleman and a variant cover by Eamon Winkle. And for folks who are new to the series, we have bundles of issues 1 through 4. And the metal covers are back. I just wanted to take a second to explain what these metal covers are. They're actually fully functioning comic books with sheet metal covers. This is not holographic. This is a fully functional comic that has a metal cover. Really cool. Anyways, thanks for watching till the end. And if you dig science fiction or horror, I hope you back our project. Yeah, that's those are
It's always
all 4 issues so far.
it's always satisfying to like see something you worked on like in a physical form. I'm sure you like you have 5 books done and complete. Congrats on that, man. I mean, I
Thanks.
mean, you have so many other books, obviously, but so how long have you been doing this? How long have you been making comics? Because you have like, you said Kaiju Blues, the Spell Slinger, House of Blood. Looks like you also have a webtoon. So you've been doing this for a while then.
Yeah, would say I guess I professionally or like I'm not sure what a professional comics person is, but um, running Kickstarters for two years now. But I started working on these books probably a little bit before, probably like a year and a half before my first Kickstarter. So that'd be like 3.5 to 4 years. But I had a background in prose fiction, so writing
Mhm.
short stories. I mean, I wrote 2 novels. Um, when I say I wrote 2 novels, I wrote and I threw away 2 novels. And then I have professional publications that are short stories in various magazines and anthologies. But I found that the stories that I typically like to tell are better formatted for the comics, like um, comics readers, and they have like much more comic book sensibilities. Um, so I pivoted, like starting, I pivoted into comics from writing prose. Um, so it's been, like 3.5, 4 years. But I had been always been thinking about doing it, and I had tried pitching like stuff when I was in college, like 10
Mhm.
years ago. I tried to make a pitch, and um, I got a lot of nice, kind rejections. I think probably like 7 years ago, I got an acceptance from a publisher. Maybe it was like 5 years ago. I did get an acceptance from a publisher, but it was kind of like a wacky contract. So I didn't
Mhm.
feel comfortable with that. And then eventually that became the Spell Slinger, which is another thing that I kickstarted this year. I did 4 Kickstarters this year. 2 for a Hunting on Mars. The first one was for 1 through 3. The second one was for 1 through 4. And then I did Kaiju Blues 1 and 2. And then I kickstarted a full graphic novel. I'm not sure when I did that, but that was this year. And that was the Spell Slinger, which was a thing that I had been working on for like over 4 years. But that ended up being a graphic novel because that was like kind of a lot of like me cutting my teeth on like how to move from, like, how to write a comic book script, because there's not a lot of training material on how to do that. You kind of just have to do it and then
Mhm.
learn. It's kind of a
Mhm.
long learning process.
Yeah, I feel like writing in general is a pretty lengthy process to get into and to get right because it's so subtle and it has to do with so many different aspects of yourself, of your personality. What is it that you like? And then also not being formulaic. Like what drew me to what you have created here with the Haunting on Mars. The reason why I wanted to reach out to you and talk to you is because I felt like we had very similar sensibilities, and I can. What I enjoy is when I see something that I can feel the sensibility, but I can also feel that there's the creativity and the playful aspect of it, right? That keeps it from being like a copy of something that somebody else has already done. Like before we started this, you were talking about some of your influences, and what struck me originally, I think you had this as your maybe one of your taglines on one of your posts, but the idea of like Resident Evil meets like cyberpunk or something like that. And I've always thought that because, like when you look at games, like that's a great way of putting it, because I mean, for one thing, it's appealing to people that are in pop culture media, right? They're like, people love games. That's primarily people's like main thing that they do now. So you're connecting it with that, and it immediately grabs your interest, because you're like, yeah, why don't we have a cyberpunk Resident Evil? Like, nobody's doing that. Why? You know?
Yeah, I am a big fan of taking multiple things that I love.
Hmm.
And genre is one of the things that I love most. I love like all genre fiction. I mean, if it's and I love the subgenres of genre. So like, science fiction, cool. Cyberpunk, even cooler. Um, Horror, cool. Ghost stories, even cooler. All right, how do I combine those? How do I start like
Hmm.
mixing the tropes of those? And where is that? Where is the story going to start breaking down? And then, so I think like, yeah, like when you're saying, you mentioned like confronting formula, I think
Hmm.
uh, Philip K. Dick is just one of the most unformulaic like writers. Like it's very hard to predict
Hmm.
what the ending of a Philip K. Dick would be, other than if you say like, oh well, it's going to question reality. Yeah, sure, but like that is such a like that's not going to be like a formulaic pattern. I think probably his most formulaic book is um that I've read is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and and it's formulaic in its plot structure, but it has a lot of like these heavier themes that you're paying that will distract you from that like typical like rising action climax falling action resolution that
Hmm.
story definitely has, but it has all
Hmm.
of these things that are like this social commentary on religion and the 24-hour news cycle, and and social interactions, and like medicating your own depression and things like that, like so yeah, I think like for me, like I do it's hard because comic books, it's
Hmm.
like prose is easy to be less formulaic, but with comic books, it's like you get beaten into this like an issue is 20 pages, a page is 5.5 panels, and so you do have to do a lot of mapping when you're writing. Like you have to do, and maybe that mapping isn't formulaic, but it does have to have this certain rigid structure, at
Hmm.
least when you're designing your scenes, because it's like you can't have like one issue that's 30 pages, or if you do, it's gonna a publisher is gonna be like upset because it's gonna
Yeah.
cost way more to print, or whatever. I mean, if you're an indie guy like me, then you can have a 30-page issue. It doesn't matter, you're your own publisher.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, I do think that there is a little bit like you there is formula inherent in comics because of that like that that pacing of like how I
Hmm.
have 20 pages to tell a story.
Hmm.
That like can be really restricting, but then it also
Hmm.
can be like it can kind of be freeing too, if you can figure out your workarounds. And um but yeah, I digress.
Yeah, yeah, we were talking about some of your influences, and you had mentioned before we started this, and you had mentioned Philip K. Dick was, and for those that are on this channel, you probably know that I'm adapting Philip K. Dick short stories into comics, and yeah, I totally agree. I just finished up The Golden Man. I adapted that into a comic, and there was a lot of the prose that I had to take out because it was just, it wouldn't have fit for a comic. They're definitely two different. They're two different things. And with comics, I feel like there's probably a lot less patience from the reader on things that you could explore more fully with prose. But it's also interesting because, you know, in the case of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which it became Blade Runner, which I also have a video series on my YouTube channel that's basically like analyzing Blade Runner and like the story structure of it and whatnot. I still feel like I feel like a book like that would still work as a comic. I don't know if anybody did a full adaptation of that story. I think they mostly have done adaptations of the movie. But there's some really complicated ideas in there. But I think it would still work in a comic format. You think so?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certain it would work as a graphic novel.
Yeah.
I mean, it would work as a comic book too. You might have to make, like, when I say comic book, I'm thinking of like the monthly publishers and being in the direct market and trying to get your book. So A Haunting on Mars was originally published by Scout Comics, which I'm not like legally allowed to talk too much about what went on with that, but it's no longer being published by them. But it was originally kind of envisioned to be, you know, on your local comic book shop shelf, and the first issue was published like that. But yeah, I think like you'd have more freedom if you just did a free, like, if you were adapting it as like a free form graphic novel and you didn't have to have your pacing like, oh, and then this is the climax of the first issue, just like the climax of the chapter 1 or whatever, because the direct market might have a certain expectation that you're gonna have a gunfight at the end of issue 1 or whatever, and it's like, well, you actually like don't get that, like, just despite it being about like someone hunting androids, like, there's not a ton of action throughout the whole book. You know, there's concepts like the front half, you know, focuses a lot more on like the more conceptual things. So yeah, I would be, you know, I'm sure I would like an adaptation either way, but I think one of those adaptations would be a little bit more freeing.
For
And I
sure.
also find it like, I'm looking at your adaptation of the first issue of The Hanging Stranger, and I'm like thinking like, I haven't read The Hanging Stranger, but what comes to mind is, and I think it makes sense, like what you're choosing to be your splash pages, like that makes a lot of sense to me. Like you want to like have a lot of real estate for like big ass portals opening, like ripping through like reality. Like that makes sense to have one page or two massive panels to dedicate to that intensity. And then when you have like a bunch of dialogue or whatever, like maybe they're not necessarily slower movements, but you know, you're going to be traveling more between the dialogue bubbles on, so you can have like, I don't know, more panels on those pages. It's always an interesting thing to think about. Yeah, the adaptation, like from prose into illustration, and then from there, like you were saying, like what we can just cut some of this stuff entirely because it's not going to work, or you can even add things. So
yeah, definitely. So you're somebody who's drawn like a lot of your inspiration from just literature in general. That's kind of the sense that I've gotten from the conversation we had before. So Philip K. Dick was an influence. Like, who were some of the other influences that kind of inspired you to even want to be a writer to begin with?
sure, yeah. So yeah, Philip K. Dick is a big one. He's actually not the biggest influence on A Haunting on Mars.
Okay.
The biggest influence on A Haunting on Mars are there's three really big ones. One is Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, which is like kind of, I don't want to say like a cerebral, but it's like a psychological horror, and it's a classic, and it's like a must read for like the horror haunted house subgenre. It is considered the best, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is Hell House by Richard Matheson, which is like this gruesome inversion of basically the same plot structure and story with the same tropes and the same character types, but if like a dude wrote it. So like you have like this one like literary take that's like a very good, very well renowned novel, and then there's like a gruesome, grotesque book called Hell House that was written like 3 or 4 years later by Richard Matheson. And Richard Matheson wrote a lot of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes. He wrote the I Am Legend, which was adapted into a movie, but he basically like invented zombies. In I Am Legend, it was like they were vampires, but like basically George Romero, when he made Night of the Living Dead, was trying to adapt I Am Legend, and then basically kind of did an adaptation in a way. It's not really an adaptation, but his biggest influence was that work. So yeah, I love that. I love Richard Matheson, and then the other one was just the cyberpunk, kind of like cyberpunk in general, which has a lot of great authors, but one of the most famous ones is William Gibson, who wrote Neuromancer. And that is for like the style, like he really brought the style of cyberpunk. Like it's like this dirty noir kind of like drug addicted main characters, kind of like everyone is kind of gray. There's like these corporations. The plot is kind of like whatever. I think I've read that book twice or 3 times, and each time I'm like there's whole things that I forget happen, because it's like a lot of the stuff is inconsequential. It's just a style book, which is just like a really cool vibe. So those are kind of like my main influences. There's like for A Haunting on Mars, but I do also very much love, we were talking about The Lathe of Heaven, the Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I really, really love that book. That's one of my favorite books. And I read that one. I think I read that this year, and then I just started reading a bunch by her. And other new wave science fiction people I really like. So any prominent science fiction author that was like publishing in the 60s and 70s, I haven't read and I would like them, or I have read and I did like them. So those are kind of my influences. I do also like horror, but yeah, I'm on a sci-fi kick right now.
Yeah, what I appreciate about you sharing your influences is that it gives me a rabbit hole to go down, because I love that whenever I look at anything. Like I'm sure are you a Kojima fan? Are you a fan of Metal Gear?
Oh yeah, I used to really like Metal Gear, but I just haven't been able to play as much video games lately.
Yeah, well, he's really interesting. I really appreciate his stuff, because there's also rabbit holes of like different authors that you can kind of go down and read, and you can kind of be like, oh, okay, this is kind of where this idea was inspired from. And yeah, so Neuromancer. So if anybody is getting anything from this, from this podcast, you should definitely read more, because we were talking about that before, that I kind of lament that a lot of people don't read as much as they play games. And I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do, but there's so many badass books out there with really cool ideas, really cool worlds that would never make it into a Hollywood film. Like Philip K. Dick's book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, is far superior to Blade Runner. And it's not that Blade Runner is a terrible film. Like I said, I have an analysis on this channel, and I think it's beautiful. But there's ideas in there that either because of time constraints or because Ridley Scott wanted to make his own thing. He wanted to make Blade Runner, which is fine. He wanted his vision of it. It didn't get adapted into it. And I think what's really interesting about books and about literature in general is that you have the highest density of ideas in the books, in the stories, because it doesn't cost anything for somebody to write a book. Like if you sit down and you write a novel, like you don't have to know how to draw. You don't have to, you don't really have to do anything other than sit down and be motivated to actually complete something. And so because of that, there's so many different things it is that you can go to in novels and get inspired from whenever you go and you make your own comic book. And that's something I've noticed with some of the people it is that I have talked to that, make their own comics or something like that. It's interesting to me that like people can write and then not read. They might watch movies and stuff like that and take inspiration from there. But it's like for like films, for the most part, as far as I can see, most films, it's like there's a small segment of ideas that they can explore. And they just don't want to risk anything that goes beyond a certain idea of what it is that people would be interested in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I with film adaptations, I mean, I definitely prefer the book, and I feel like I feel like you're the only other person that I've ever heard say that.
Really?
And it really is because of the ideas. And also I may have read the book before I watched the movie, and that might be a thing. I know I recommended the book to someone who had, grew up on the movie and then read the book and was like, well, I thought it was a cool book, but the movie's a masterpiece. I'm like, okay, I mean, maybe they're both masterpieces, but it's just, it's not as dense. I mean, the thing is like, movies can be really, really cool, but are they ever able to capture what a book captured? Most of the time, no. Well, most of the time, if it's something like a Philip K. Dick book, no, it's not possible. Can it be something new and different and maybe better? Yes, that is possible. It's not likely. I mean, it does happen. Maybe I would argue that the Shining movie transcends Stephen King's The Shining. I think that is a pretty standard opinion that most people have that have read the book and have seen the movie. That's also my opinion. I think the book is great. I don't think the book is a masterpiece. I think the movie is a masterpiece. So it's like I think it can happen. I think it's really rare. And I think that just because of what a novel can be, they can be much more dense. It's like, okay, well, Stephen King novels they conceptually tend to be not super dense. Like they are actually dense in that there are a lot of words, a lot of things happen, but it's not like super sophisticated science fiction. It's horror that has a metaphor about an alcoholic father or whatever, That's cool. But like the movie is, in this one instance, maybe like transcends a little bit of what it's adapting. I do think it's like, so I do think it's possible. I just think it's like very, very implausible that, and yeah, like you said, like most people like they're just able to get that surface level of like what's in film, which is going to tend to not be what you can get out of a 300-page novel or even a 200-page light. You know, a lot of this, like the 70s stuff that I was talking about before we hopped on, started recording, is like, those aren't big novels. Like they're not like doorstopper Brandon Sanderson books. Like they're pretty, like they're a breeze to read, but they're like, they got like some crazy ass ideas that'll like really have your head scratching or make you think more than probably the average movie. But yeah, I but also now it's, you were saying like people don't read as much now, and that's unfortunate. And I agree. I want to say to people, it's easier now to read than it has ever been before. I mean, I have all of these like apps on my phone for my library. Like a lot of the stuff I do pay for a subscription for like Libro, which gives me like, it's got like a thing like Audible, but then I also have like audio downloads from my library. So it's like, if you can't just churn through like a small 200-page book, you know, you can always listen to something on Audible, and that can help. You know, that can help get you some books under your belt. If you're a struggling reader and you want to be exposed to like more dense ideas or whatever. Just a suggestion to your audience.
Yeah. Because that's what's really interesting about it, is like there's so much more world building it is that authors get to do when it's just them and their vision. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of all this genre stuff. I think a lot of it is really interesting. I think in the case of The Shining, the film is definitely superior considering it is Kubrick, and that Kubrick likes to. I think Kubrick is kind of like the closest it is that we've gotten to like a kind of a literary sort of take on film, right? Because like there's multiple levels that you can watch it at. Like the average viewer is just going to see it as just like it's a horror film, and then obviously there is a metaphor of the alcoholic father. But if you go through and you look at like I did an interview with this guy Rob Adger on my YouTube channel here, and he did this in crazy in-depth breakdown of like all of his films and the different stuff it is that he's hidden in The Shining. It's pretty awesome. Like there's a lot of subtext. There's basically like 2 or 3 movies piled into one for any Kubrick movie, but specifically The Shining.
Yeah, and I just don't think that there's, like, I love Stephen King, and I like that book, but it's also just like, it's just a fine book, but it doesn't have like a ton of subtext. Like it's a lot. I mean, it's rather in your face about the metaphor. So, I do think though, I hear that Denis Villeneuve is adapting Rendezvous with Rama, and I suspect if he does go through with that adaptation, I think that will be better than the book. And I think it's a limitation of that book being basically it feels a lot like a TV or a film script, and it's not like a super high concept thing. It's basically the premise of that book is there's a cylindrical object that goes through our galaxy, or goes through our solar system, and some astronauts land on it, and inside of it is a circling like ecosystem, and when it gets close to our sun, it kind of becomes alive, and then they leave, and then it goes off, and that's kind of it conceptually. It's just this almost like a First Contact story, but not particularly deep. It's like visually interesting because they're on this cylindrical spinning thing, and so it creates this atmosphere, but you can see, it's this huge, almost like a continent sized thing, spaceship or whatever, but you can see the floor above you. The forest is like, above you and below you. So I think that will, if he adapts that, I think the visuals of that will just be like cooler than reading basically what I just said. Like if you're in the center of that mass, like you're basically gravity, like there's no gravity. But then if you're like if you're like on a ladder from one side to the other side, you'll start feeling gravity. I don't know. It's like that's cool to read in a book, but that one I'd rather see in a movie, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds like a cool idea for a game too.
Yeah. That's funny. I think that like the weird perspectives just reminded me. Have you ever played Splitgate?
Splitgate? No. What is that?
Splitgate is like this kind of like Halo-esque shooter that is like a mix. It's a multiplayer game, like a competitive shooter, but it's also kind of like Portal, the puzzle game.
Oh, yeah.
So like you can like really big brain your opponents and not like, so it's like it is a very like a skill based game, and that you have to have that quick twitch, you got to hit your headshots and all that kind of stuff. But then you can like big brain people with like where you put your portals. Like if you put a portal behind someone's head and you're hiding in a corner, and you put you could just snipe them from the other side, from cover, or it's just it just adds a lot of interesting perspective. And I feel like if you had a shooter where you could kind of see like the whole cylindrical map like that, I don't know, it might add something to that genre. I don't know.
Yeah, do you have any interest in like going into other stuff other than comics? Like, because you have an interest in all these other things, and I guess that's the appeal of being a writer, right? Because like you're basically writing the stories and then you're having other people draw them, which we'll talk about the artists that you work with here in a moment. But do you have an interest in like taking one of these IPs and like seeing if you can find some developers that would be interested in making it into a game and hiring people or something like that? Do you ever imagine that?
I mean, I think that would be really cool. Like that would be very flattering to have a video game based off of anything that I do. But the one that I think that's most adaptable into a video game is this book that I kickstarted earlier this year called The Spellslinger. And the premise of The Spellslinger is it's about a guy who is cursed, but it takes place in like a weird West setting where he casts spells from a revolver, and he has to balance casting his spells with any offense. So it's a very like kind of game centric, like baked into the world building. And I could see that adapting like super nicely into a shooter or even a tactical game where you're having to like certain magics are like kind of like a rock paper scissors like aspect. But yeah, I mean, I would love to work in games. I think games, well, all my friends play games. Like I think when you look at like the type of media that people consume, reading comic books is like at the very, very, very bottom, and like playing video games is at like the very, very, very top. So I guess like being vain and just wanting like more people to like see, or at least have my work impact the most amount of people, it would probably be in games. But I don't I don't really know how to do that, and I don't know, like, but if a studio ever was interested, I would absolutely be interested in. I have a lot of ideas, guys.
Yeah, I've had like a couple of I've interviewed a couple of game dev people. Dude, it seems pretty damn daunting to try to create a game. Like it's a ton of work from what I can tell. Like these guys that they're like there's one or two people and they make the entire game and you're looking at it and you're like, holy shit, dude. Like
I mean, yeah,
you try
right.
to build Dead Space or Resident Evil with two people. Like, that's wild.
Yeah, I think like I already feel like I'm splitting myself so thin as far as like having to do design, having to do marketing, having to do all of the lettering and all of, I'm writing everything, and um I feel like I'm already like such a jack of all trades that like if I had to pick up more skills, it would just break my brain. And the fact that those people, they're doing all of the stuff that I am already doing, plus they're artists, like,
Mm-hmm.
and and they're programmers. It's like
Yeah.
all of the shit that I already do, and then two hard skills, like not
Yeah.
soft skills, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
those are hard. I mean, yeah. So
So you've done 4 Kickstarters this year. And so this has basically been you solidifying those skills of marketing and working with teams. And so what did you learn through this process that like has made it easier for you? What do you wish you knew when you started?
oh, um, hmm. Yeah, what do I wish I knew when I started? Lot like Twitter, like ads on Twitter, useless. Wish I'd known that. I
Okay.
wouldn't have spent any money on that, but not that I spent much money to begin with, but I would have saved myself like
Mhm.
$100 or whatever. There's no conversion on Twitter. Not That's just a
Mhm.
practical thing um
Mhm.
of doing advertising, I guess. Yeah. I do wish that I there's so few resources on like how to write a comic,
Yeah.
like there's a lot of like details that you don't know going into writing a comic. I guess now I'm just taking that for granted, that like take years to. So when you're talking to an artist, for instance, you have to visualize how this is going to look on the page. You cannot
Yeah.
visualize it any other way. Like you if you're creating comic books, you should probably, I would as a piece of advice to to anyone that's interested in making comic books, you should make a comic book. The first comic book that you should make, you should do everything on your own, including the art. Like
Yeah.
you eat, no matter regardless of what your skill set is. If you're not an
Mhm.
artist, like I'm not an artist, but I could make a comic book all on my own. Anyone can. It's just the art wouldn't be very good. But the reason I say that that's important to do is because you will learn what's possible and what's not possible to do. So there's things like you can't have like 13 panels on a page and each panel have like 5 people talking in it. There's like
Mhm.
certain things that you won't know. Like you can't have a character doing 2 things at once in one panel. Like you can't have them opening the door and shooting a gun at the same time unless you're doing it with 2 different hands. Like
Mhm.
it's one action at a time per panel, typically per
Mhm.
character. Um, just like there's a lot of little things that like there's no
Mhm.
school that tells you what to do. You just kind of start picking these things up. And I guess I
Do
wouldn't
you?
have even thought of that, but I'm starting to have a
Mhm.
friend that I'm working with. I'm editing his work, and I'm like, hey, you can't like when I'm reading his work, I'm like, you can't have this character roll his eyes and frown. and laugh. Like those are that's 3 different panels that you just described in one panel. Like an artist is going to look at this and be like, what do I draw? Like this person can't do 3 things. They're going to look crazy.
There's a, do you know the manga artist Urasawa? He did Monster.
What is his work?
Monster?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he's got a YouTube channel, and it's a pretty good resource for what you're talking about, because I think he's had like a huge influence on manga in general, and that he can basically have one shot and it communicates like several things, the character's expression, but also it's like somebody firing a gun and he's recoiling the gun, and the bullet is shooting up in the air and the guy is dropping dead, and the guy's like smoking a cigarette at the same time or whatever. Like his style is like, it's really cool, but it's like very efficient, and it can communicate a lot of things all at the same time. So I'm looking at him for the next stuff it is that I'm doing, because I had that challenge too whenever, these 2 comics, these 2 Philip K. Dick comics, I specifically wanted to adapt a story that was already written, because I have my own stories that I've written, but the art and the storytelling isn't there like on the same level that I want it to be. So I thought like, okay, if I adapt somebody's short stories, then I'll get some experience, some runway experience with actually completing a comic. And if you're an artist and you are interested in making comics, but you don't have a story, going into the public domain and just taking a story and adapting it will give you so much. It'll give you so much experience, because you'll have to deal with those very common problems of like, you have something you want to communicate. It has to be direct. It has to be obvious, and it has to be direct. It has to be obvious, and it has to communicate something to the story on a page, while at the same time being visually appealing, right? So there's a storytelling, and then there's the actual like design and the beauty of it, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
The art of it. It has to be both of those things. Otherwise, people are just they're gonna flip through it, and they're just gonna be like, what is this? This is just a bunch of talking heads. Like, people are not going to be interested in it.
Yeah, there's like the practicality too, where it's like, how many bubbles, like at a certain point, if you're an artist, you may you'll very, very quickly realize how much text can fit in a panel, and how much text is going to cover your art. But if you're a writer, it might take you a while to realize that, hey, if you're having this amount of basically like A B character talking, like just from a practical standpoint, you might not want to have. You have to think about like, okay, well, this character is going to shoot this other character in this panel, and it's going to be like a cool panel. But if you have a bunch of dialogue on it, then that's also something to consider. Like, you might have like the cool visuals, and then your dialogue's just screwing up the flow, like, so then you might want to be positioning again, like practically, pacing wise. Do I want several panels with no dialogue, just for pacing? And that's another thing. You should read outside of like whatever you're comfortable with. You should start reading shit that you're not comfortable with. Like, what are you like me and you're obsessed with like 70s sci-fi right now? Go start reading like 90s like Japanese translated books. And you just be like, oh, okay, there's like actually like other ways to go about creating story. I more in the last like 5 to 10 years, I've gotten into like 5 to 7 years, I've gotten into manga. And like you said, like I've read I haven't read all of Monster, but I've read a lot of that, and 20th Century Boys, which is also really good. And Junji Ito is like a favorite of mine, because really, really good visual storytelling, really good for pacing on horror. So I think like, I don't know. for me, it's hard. It's hard. What I tell me, but what would I tell other people is to like read broadly, read a lot of stuff, read stuff that you're not comfortable with, and like analyze what you're reading. Don't just read for entertainment. Do read for entertainment. Find shit that you like, but also read shit that you don't like, because then you're able to figure out like, why don't I like this? What isn't working? You know. And then just be like, I'm not gonna do that because that doesn't work for me. Like that's what shitty like writers, shitty comic book creators, shitty artists do. So then I'm gonna tailor my work this way. But yeah.
Yeah. Did you so that's kind of like more on the creative side, but what has the process been as far as like the crowdfunding side, the side of like promoting it, whatever, like you said, the ads don't work. So I'm assuming that a lot of what you do is going on to other people's podcasts or just like posting a lot, reaching out to people. Like what is it that has worked for you on that side of it?
I think a healthy amount of like get as soon I think as soon as I could have, I would have said get a pre-launch page as soon as you can and just have it up there and be discoverable. Like if someone on Kickstarter is like looking at upcoming campaigns, yours might appear there for them depending on their searches, depending on what your campaign is. So the longer you have that up, the longer you can kind of talk about and get pre-launch followers. That's supposed to be like a real key thing. I think don't sweat the middle chunks of a Kickstarter. I think the middle chunks of the Kickstarter, when I say middle chunks, is like the first like 3 days is like really important. You get a lot of activity in the first 3 days and you get a lot of activity in the last 2 days. And then it's just a little trickle in. It's like a little trickle throughout the rest of the campaign. So unless you go viral or whatever, my first one, I feel like it did pretty well. And it was from 2 years ago. I haven't had success like that. The first House of Blood Kickstarter, it funded at like 7,000, so which was like above my expectations. But so I think I would not sweat like the middle sections where it's like it doesn't feel like your campaign is moving. You're getting something called like followers. Like people will click, like they'll look at your campaign, they'll just click notify me, and you'll get like conversions at the end where Kickstarter actually does marketing. It kind of does marketing for you in that when your campaign is running towards the end, it will email all of the people who haven't donated but are following, and then you'll get like 30% of the people who are like, I don't know, you get anywhere from like 10 to 30% will just be like, yeah, I'll back now that I got that email, and it's like 24 hours is left. So that's like one of the practical things that I would say, like, don't sweat that middle part. It sucks, but it's like a thing that, you still get backers. It's just at a slower rate.
So
but I haven't really been able to figure it out. I like print out flyers. I think that's a thing. Like I'm trying to like contact other Kickstarters and be like, hey, do you do your own fulfillment? Can you put flyers for my upcoming Kickstarters? I think that is helpful, because if people actually like see, hey, like this is like a Haunting on Mars, this looks pretty dope. Like, I'll scan that code and become a follower for that launch. So that would be a thing, I guess I would tell myself, like, think about marketing like that, like physical marketing. Get posters at your local comic shops, like wherever, like local comic book shops might be, that's where a lot of people who buy comic books go. So if you can get your homies to hang a poster up there, then maybe, and you have like a QR code or whatever that goes to your pre-launch page, that might help. That might help, when you have like, they say you're supposed to launch with like 100 followers.
Yeah.
Which is hard, it's hard to get up there, Right now, I have a pre-launch for my next project, and it's got like 26 followers. So it's like it takes a while to grow those numbers.
What is your next? I'm assuming it's on here, right?
Maybe it will show up. Is it loading?
Is 1 and 2, 1 through 4, Spellslinger, House of Blood, Dino Knights.
Dino Knights. Cool. Dino Knights is like that's all the science fiction-y shit that I've been reading now. It's all like, it's time travel, it's like Arthurian stuff, it's like super, super at the end of the world, like basically like 4 billion years, like the heat death of the universe, that there's still a planet, like we move, like the sun's gonna expand, like the planet like has these like big engines that moved it outside of like the expansion of the sun's radius. And it's just like there's these dinosaur knights that are on the planet at the end of time, and they're fighting these sentient AI robots, and they send some hatchlings back to now times. And that's kind of like the premise, and one of them goes back to actual Arthurian times. It gets split up, so they don't know it, but they're split kind of in their birth. And there's 3 of them that are like contemporary times. That are like, and they grow up in New York, and they have like a D&D shop that they run. People think that they're like animatronics, and then there's one that gets raised by King Arthur's son, Mordred, and is like best friends with Mordred. And then anyways, it's this whole time travel, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a bunch of shit that I love, all just kind of thrown into one. And I'm trying to make it this ongoing series. So I just set that pre-launch up. So we'll I'll send you, I have the issues, a bunch of the issues are like in the bag, like basically done. Okay. So I'll email you what I've got done if you want to check those out.
Yeah, totally. I'll make sure to include a link to Dino Knights in the description, so people can jump in and follow you, so they'll be notified. Let's watch this teaser real quick, and then we'll have to close this out because I'm about to have to head out. But I want to watch your Dino Knights teaser. I think it's just a quick.
I don't think I see it.
Oh, is it not? Oh, okay. My bad. I thought I was sharing that. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is your Dino Knights, the once and future Knights, and you've got a teaser here. We'll watch this here in a second. But the art looks fucking awesome.
Thanks. That's Dave Schwartz is on the art, and he's awesome. He's a really good artist. And I have a couple of other artists that are contributing to it too.
So you usually have like one person doing the inks and then somebody else doing the coloring, and then you do the lettering?
Typically, but he actually does everything. He's like, he does it all. So that it's just a little teaser for what it would look like if it was animated.
That looks great.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. That's a really cool idea. Cool, man. Well, I appreciate you hanging out and chatting with me. I've enjoyed our conversation. For those that are interested in checking out any of your books, I'm assuming you have this link tree that I'm looking at right here. I'm assuming you can see it.
Yeah.
I'm going to include that. And there you have pretty much everything. You've got the upcoming Dino Knights, the once and future Knight. And then you also have the funded Kickstarters here listed. Haunting on Mars, 1 through 4, Kaiju Blues, Haunting on Mars 1 through 3, Spellslinger, House of Blood, and you've got an online store. What is the difference between the 1 through 4 and the 1 through 3? Like, I'm just curious why you have both of these listed.
Yeah, so 1 through 3 was just like the campaign for that I did through 1 through 3, and then basically A Haunting on Mars 1 through 4 is for the 4th issue. It was to kickstart the print run of issue 4, and you could buy. You can still that link, even though it's funded. I have late pledges, so people can go to that link and they can get all 4 issues there. So yeah, I had the 2 links up just because there were 2 separate campaigns, and then I'll have another campaign in like 2 months or 3 months for the 5th issue. I just don't have it in pre-launch yet. That's the other thing, is like, it's just tiring. It's like, it's not creatively fulfilling to run all these campaigns. I'll tell you that. Like, it's just market. It's just like busy work. I don't enjoy it, but it is very gratifying to have like the, between all of these Kickstarters this year, it's literally been like hundreds of people that I'm shipping off like, I don't know, 400 packages this year. So it's like, that's gratifying. I like to do the shipping and to doing the fulfillment, but man, like setting up the Kickstarters, that's not fun. It's just, but that's how it has to be done. Like, I don't know any other way, I try to work with the publisher, and now I can't legally talk about why I'm not, but let's just say I don't really like working with publishers because
it always turns into something else when other people start getting involved. It's pretty much where you got to put it. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I look forward to chatting some more. Like I said, the link, this Linktree link will be down in the description box. So you can go and you can check out his books, and he's also got his social media links down there at the bottom. Thank you, Zach, for hanging out, man. It's been fun.
Thanks, Wes.
All right, guys. Take care.